Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Sean Chandler. Thanks again for joining me for another great Power BI video. I wanted to spend some time today talking about 10 really common design mistakes that I see people, mostly who are newer, to Power BI make. And so the inspiration for this actually came from my LinkedIn feed, where I'm constantly seeing people who are making amazing things in Power BI and submitting them to some of the contests like those hosted by Maven Analytics, Enterprise DNA, and a bunch of others. And that's one of my favorite things right now is being able to see all the great work that people are doing in Power BI. But that said, I also see a lot of people who are, very, very clear about the fact that this is, my first Power BI report, or this is only my second Power BI report. And in those cases, I see a lot of people who are making fairly simple design mistakes that are really easy to improve. And so I thought that I would dedicate just one video on this channel to 10 really common design mistakes that I see people making in Power BI and how to fix them. So let's go ahead and hop over to Power BI and get started. So one of the first design mistakes that technically is not really a mistake, but I'm going to go ahead and call it a mistake because it immediately tells me that someone is brand new to Power BI, is when I see people using the default color palette in Power BI. And the way that I can always tell that is when I see this specific blue, this orange, this purple, this pink. I personally am not a huge fan of Power BI's default color theme. They actually have many other alternative themes that are built right into Power BI that are better. I would highly recommend that you explore those. But there are other resources that you can use as well. There are websites online like coolors.co where you literally just go to the website, hit space on your keyboard, and it will generate endless color palettes that are web safe, meaning they're accessible. They have enough contrast for you to use. And even though Power BI lets you design your own custom color theme, and you can actually pick 8 colors, 5 should be all that you would need in 99% of instances. Honestly, if you're using 8 colors in your Power BI report, stay tuned, because one of the other things that I'm going to talk to you about is using too many colors. We want to keep our color choices fairly simple. And really only use them to call out, the most important parts of our data visuals. So honestly, 2 or 3 colors is probably what you need in a lot of situations. So get out there, explore other color palettes. I'm going to walk you through some tips on designing, smart color palettes in this video, in fact, and I'm even going to dedicate an entire video later on to designing a really smart color palette to use in Power BI as just one example. Of course, there are endless possibilities for color in Power BI that you can explore. I would highly encourage you to get comfortable designing your own color palette. It's a really important skill to have in Power BI. And it will also get you away from using what I consider to be a fairly garish and overly bright color palette that I personally have not used in Power BI for years and years and years. Another really common design mistake that I see people make when they're brand new to Power BI, and especially in some of these Power BI competitions being hosted online, is using background images. Why, people? First of all, background images can be really distracting and pull the user away from the data visuals that you've designed. And they can also just, make it harder to read text, make it harder to interpret your data visual. And the favorite point that I'm going to make here is if you are putting a background image into your report and you're just covering it up with a bunch of data visuals, then why are you bothering with it in the first place? Specifically, for the past month, I've been watching, entry after entry after entry roll in on Maven Analytics on their pizza analysis competition, and I saw so many Power BI reports with huge pizza images in the background, and most of them were so covered up in data visuals that I couldn't even tell what pizza it was. I think most of them were probably pepperoni. But anyway, if you're using background images and no one can see them, they serve no point. And even if somebody can tell what the background image is, chances are that background image is pulling attention away from the data. If it doesn't have any value, if that background image isn't helping people interpret the insights and the data in your tool, lose the background image. You at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have a bulletproof color theme. You want to keep your Power BI design as simple and as minimalist as possible, and eliminate everything that isn't serving your users and interpreting the data and insights that you're presenting more easily. If you are trying to build a theme, or if you're trying to, visually help users understand what they're looking at even faster, iconography can be fine. I use little simple icons in my Power BI builds all the time to sort of help users easily interpret, the flavor of data that they're looking at, while also adding a little bit of visual flair to the report. So icons, not necessarily a problem. I will say that if you're using the same icon a whole bunch of times on your Power BI report, you might be overdoing it. Going back to that Maven pizza challenge, I did see a couple of entries that had little pizza slice icons. I think the most I counted was like 30 on one page. People probably get the idea that it's a pizza report by the time you've used, the 11th or 12th pizza slice. So I'm joking, of course, I'm teasing. But anyway, keep your icon use simple and eliminate background images as much as possible. They're not doing you any favors. The next thing is, once again, my favorite, color. We want to make sure that we are not minimizing color use. I don't want you to think that you should never use color. I want you to think that you should save color for the right moment, because color is the most powerful weapon that you have in your data visualization arsenal for making a user look where they should look at the right moment in order to reach, the intended conclusion that you were hoping they would reach from interpreting a data visual a certain way. So here I have, just some fake car sales data that I found online. So you've got a lot of recognizable car brands here. And I created a bar chart, that also has some markers on it indicating, total sales for each vehicle manufacturer and the average sales price. And I've made the amateur mistake of throwing the manufacturer category into the legend of this bar chart so that each vehicle manufacturer is uniquely labeled by a color. And notice just how much more confusing and garish and distracting this visual is with the color, as opposed to if I had just stripped off all of that color entirely and just used gray with contrast in order to help the user read this visual. So here you have a much easier to read visual on the right without utilizing any color at all. So you have, clearly somebody can look at this, they can still plainly read the total sales for each manufacturer, and they can also cross-reference the second y-axis on the right in order to view the average sales price, which are noted clearly in these the dark markers that are hovering above each vehicle manufacturer. Color is not always going to help make your visual easier to read. It's not going to help it always look better. And first and foremost, it's not always necessary. So if you feel like your report is suffering from a case of color chaos, try just reverting all of the colors in your report to black and white or grayscale like I have here. Then from there, start to figure out what you are really trying to convey in each data visual and across your report, and then only use color. Reserve color for highlighting the most important elements in your data that are going to help users follow, from point to point in your Power BI report in order to walk away with the insights or takeaways that you had originally intended, the ones that are most important. The next thing that I see users doing that, here I'm just going to put a little bit of Sean flavor on this topic. This is not a universal thing by any means, but if you're using serif fonts, we need to have a word. I am not at all a fan of Times New Roman. Fonts are timed to be boring. I tend to stay away entirely from fonts like Times New Roman, Georgia, Constantia, Courier New, anything that's got the little tails on it. We don't want to be fancy or whimsical in our Power BI reports. Ultimately, you have picked the right font for Power BI if no one notices what font you chose at all. If somebody makes a comment about your font choice, you've picked the wrong one. Ideally, your font selection in Power BI, Tableau, anywhere where you're visualizing data is going to be boring. In other words, that no one's going to notice it, but it's going to be highly readable. In a perfect world, you would be able to read this font from across the room. So I'm going to say that because of that, Comic Sans, for example, which is kind of a punching bag among fonts, is honestly a better choice than Times New Roman or some of your other serif fonts, because at least it's pretty damn reasonable or readable. However, 99% of the time, you're going to be fine with these three fonts, in my opinion. Just using Calibri, Segway, DIN, which you can actually see here visualized in this visual, that are highly readable, take up a fairly small amount of space, and are just going to be really, really easy for your users to skim through super quickly without ever bringing up your font selection. So fonts, go boring, keep it simple, make sure that they can be read from across the room and you've picked the right one. Next point is, I feel like I'm maybe starting to get a little bit redundant here, but it's worth underscoring. Lose the clutter. You know, if you're building a Power BI report and there's a background image and there's a whole lot of different colors going on, and you're using background colors in all of your cards, your slicers, and you're using all of these different design elements with no sense of harmony, then chances are you're really going to overwhelm your user right out of the gate. I mean, like, imagine that you're jumping into a Power BI report for the first time and you don't know anything about the data. You've never seen Power BI. You don't know what you're looking at. The example that I mocked up here on the left would literally send me into panic mode right out of the gate. You know, what are all these cards? Are they all equally important? What should I interpret? You know, what do I do with these slicers that are here? These bar charts are all different colors. Should I read anything into the fact that they're all different colors? What do I do? People get pretty panicky when they're brand new to Power BI and you're dumping a whole lot of data on them that they've never seen before. So the trick is to really scale down all of your aesthetic choices, so that you're only highlighting the most essential takeaways. You want to make sure that all of your visuals are very evenly spaced out. You want to make sure that everything in your report has room to breathe. If you have KPIs or, measures in your Power BI report that you really want to pop, that you really want to highlight, put them at the top and make them extra visible by using contrast or using like a flourish of color. Make sure that you take any pointless visuals or any visuals that might be interesting but really don't serve any purpose and maybe are only interesting to you. Just lose them, get rid of them. And of course, if you have a background image, lose that entirely. You can see how much easier it is to read the one on the right than the one on the left. And again, the one on the left, it looks like there's maybe a young person with headphones on, but I can barely tell what's going on, so why would I even include that background image? And of course, if you have like controls in your report, like bookmark buttons, or if you have slicers, put all of those into one area where a user can easily find them, reference them when they're needed. But when they're not interested in slicing and dicing or navigating between different views, their attention is squarely focused here on the data where everything's easy to read and very clean. Another mistake that is easy to make is over-labeling your data visuals. I mean, you might be of the thought that, the more information I can stuff into a visual, the better, the easier it's going to be to read. That is not the case. As a matter of fact, we want to eliminate any unnecessary labels in text. We want to eliminate as much of that as we can. So notice the line chart here on the left. It poses a pretty simple question. What were our best and worst sales months? And even though I've clearly labeled the best and the worst, I've given them sort of, poor titles here, just min vehicles and max vehicles. And there's a lot of other labels on this visual that are sort of competing for my attention. And everything's kind of washed out because I'm using kind of a dark gray in addition to using these colors that I've chosen for these callouts that I've marked here. So what we want to do is we want to treat every data visual like a question that needs to be answered, and we want to make sure that we are limiting all of our choices in the actual data visual to just enough information, just enough color that is going to help the user easily answer that question. So if our question is, what were our best and worst sales months? Somebody needs to be able to get to the answer of that question almost instantaneously. And the way that I've redesigned this visual here makes that even easier. So I've lightened up the gray in my bars representing each month's sales, and I've pushed those to the background. And, I've also got, just the number of vehicles sold, here for reference, since that's really what we're focused on. And if we're considering best and worst sales months in terms of the number of vehicles sold, then I might as well just, relabel these and call them out in color and make sure that those are the only things that are labeled so that somebody can immediately come here and say, okay, very clear to see that August was our best sales month and April was our worst sales month. So it's that easy for somebody to come in here and interpret this visual as opposed to sort of navigating all the different data labels that are over here. Similarly, another mistake that I see people making in Power BI when they're newer to designing Power BI reports is that there's no spotlight. There's nowhere for the user to start in a Power BI report. And so the user, just kind of jumps into the Power BI report page and they're kind of on their own to figure out what does everything mean. So, if you're building a Power BI report that has some kind of a KPI card and you have a goal or a threshold that you're trying to track, you can always, make your most important metric or most important KPI card a little bit larger than everything else. And you can use like conditional formatting of your background colors to just make everything stand out a little bit more when there's a problem. And then you can carry that theme of color throughout your report. So if you have a specific KPI or measure that falls outside of a desired range, you can write a measure to call that out and change your formatting so that when somebody jumps into this report, they don't have to guess whether or not everything's on target. They immediately see, oh my gosh, something's wrong here. And if I go to this line chart down here, I can see a line that sort of apes the same color and immediately say, okay, I need to explore this further. So, just using a bit of color or smart formatting to add an additional pop or so what to your data visuals can be really, really important for helping sort of orient people around your Power BI report instead of just leaving them to jump in and make sense of it on their own. And in just a moment, I'm going to talk about contextualizing data visuals. So we're going to continue this theme here in just a moment. But speaking of users, at the end of the day, you want to remember that you're not designing Power BI reports or any sort of business intelligence tool for yourself. Ultimately, we design business intelligence tools and data visuals to be consumed by other people. So you really want to make sure that however you design your report, that you need to explain as little upfront to the user. Everything that you design ideally would be inherently intuitive. So if your report's full of things that look the same but behave differently, or if the user, it feels like they're on their own to figure out functionality, they're going to have a really rough time using your report. And so a place where I've taken a lot of inspiration over the years as somebody who is in their mid-30s and still plays a lot of video games is video games. They have taught me so much about how to design engaging user interfaces and how to design tools that people like to use, even if they're not very comfortable with Power BI or even if they're not very comfortable with the data that I'm visualizing. So in a perfect world, your users shouldn't have to guess what they can click on. This is something, an area where honestly I still struggle to this day, but sometimes I just design things that look like buttons and then people tell me I tried to click on that and nothing happened. And then I realize, oh, well, I put this weird boundary around it. I could see how you thought that was a button. And then later on in the report, there might actually be buttons that I intended for users to click on that they didn't because the other thing that looked like a button earlier in the report wasn't clickable. So I assumed that everything wasn't clickable. You don't want something like that to happen. Everything that you design, the user should know exactly what they're supposed to do with it. And that gets to a sense of reward. Your user should feel rewarded for interacting with the tool. And reward here in the Power BI sense is obviously not like giving someone money every time they click on something, although sometimes I wish that were a thing. What you want is the user to feel like they are using the tool correctly. When they click on something, something should happen. When they try to filter something, they should be able to feel like they're finding what they need. Hopefully the very act of using your Power BI report, if you're visualizing the data in an intelligent way, and if you've really got your data model nailed down and everything is running quickly, hopefully using your Power BI report should be a reward in and of itself. However, people get stuck all the time. Sometimes I get stuck when I'm using a website. If I've clicked on too many links and I'm like, oh crap, I need to back up. Or maybe I've done something in a video game and I feel like I've put myself in a corner and I need to get out of it. Well, your user should always have a way to unstuck themselves. In video games, maybe I revert back to a previous save. On a website, maybe I hit the home button just to return to the first page of a website. In Power BI, you could have a reset button that returns users to the home page and resets all the filters they've selected. Maybe you could have just a reset button on each specific page that resets the filters on that page. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this, but your users are going to use your Power BI reports. They're going to filter away, they're going to slice and dice, and then they're going to be like, how do I undo all of that? I have something else that I need to look at. Make it easy for them. Give them some quick button that they can click on that will allow them to get unstuck. And next, users should have some kind of, I'm calling it a HUD. A HUD in a video game is when you hit start or pause and a screen pops up that has, like all kinds of, maybe it shows where you are on a map, maybe it has different information or resources that you've consumed across the video game. It's just a way of getting the information that you need while you're in the middle of a video game. And in Power BI, this can mean giving users a button that they press for a glossary of terms in your report. Maybe, it spells out different acronyms. My current employer loves some acronyms. Yours probably does too. Maybe you allow them to click a button and go to a page that has a bunch of metadata or something. Basically, you're just giving them additional information to help them feel more knowledgeable at the moment when they're feeling uncertain, so that they can read up, answer the question that they had, get rid of that, and get back to slicing and dicing and using your tool. Maybe you want to include some kind of a map to everything else that's in your report. Maybe you want them to be able to pull up a map full of links to all the different pages, navigate all the different bookmarks with descriptions, and then get rid of it. Obviously, Power BI, I'm always saying, is a game of real estate management. And sometimes it's not always feasible to have all of your slicers, all of your navigation options, all present on the page at the same time because you want to focus on data visuals. So maybe that's going to require you to use something like bookmarks to create a navigation hub or a map of everything that is in your report to make it easier for users to get around. But finally, the most important thing that you want in anything that you build, anything that you design, is you want your users to feel empowered by a feeling of choice, because that's ultimately what's going to keep them coming back. You want the user to feel like, they are the ones driving the ship when they're using your report. You want them to come in and just be very, very comfortable using slicers, using filters, navigating, so that they can find exactly what they need. If your user is not empowered, or if you've ever played a bad video game, what is likely to happen when they get out of the report, or if you jump out of that video game? Well, chances are, if their experience was extremely frustrating, or if they didn't feel empowered to make the choices that they wanted to make, they aren't going to come back for a second helping of your Power BI report, just like you're not likely to jump back into that video game. So we want to make sure that we allow our users to make the right choices and find what they need, or chances are, even if your Power BI report is a treasure trove of information and insights, they're not going to come back. One more thing that I see users doing all the time, and it's an area where I personally have to remind myself to do a little extra due diligence, is in accessibility. It's important for you and all of us in BI or who visualize data to constantly be thinking about the fact that not all of our users are going to consume information or process information exactly the same way. Some people perceive color differently. Some people have more difficulty reading fonts at different sizes than others. There are a wide range of accessibility issues, far more than I have, unfortunately, time to get into in this YouTube tutorial. But you should always be thinking first and foremost about how you're visualizing data and whether or not there are any additional choices that you could make that would allow more people to read that visual seamlessly. And so take this line chart here on the left, where I've used kind of a dark purple, blue, and orange. I personally don't have any problem distinguishing between these colors, but maybe if you're someone who perceives color differently, maybe it would be very, very difficult to determine the difference between purple and blue, because they're kind of the same dark tone here. Well, some steps that we can take to make this line chart more accessible would be to reserve color, in this case purple, for only our most recent year in the line chart. And we can even add markers or something to that line just to give it an additional pop and make sure that someone is just immediately going to recognize that this purple line is 2021. And then for the other lines, you can, adjust their weight. In other words, how thick the line is. You can, utilize contrast. Like in this case, I've made 2020 a slightly darker gray, and I've made 2019 even a lighter gray. And then I've used dashes and dots for these lines to further differentiate them from each other. so that if there were someone coming into this report, even if they, happen to see this purple, blue, and even the orange exactly the same way, they still wouldn't have any trouble reading the visual on the right because I've utilized contrast and I've also used some additional stylistic choices on the different line elements to help anyone distinguish between these lines. But finally, the most important thing that you can do for your user when designing a data visual is to give them additional context. A huge mistake that I see people making is that they do a good job of designing a data visual, but they don't tell me why I should care about it. In other words, it's missing the so what element. So here I have a pretty simple line chart that just shows 2022 versus 2021 sales. And you can see 2022, it looks like we're only at the end of Q1. 2021 obviously is a completed year, and one's in blue, the other is in orange. And so it looks like 2022 sales have fallen behind 2021. Okay, that seems like it would be a bad thing, but I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how alarmed I should be, or really what this means long term. Because if I'm a sales manager, I'm not necessarily going to be able to control where sales come in each month, but I definitely need an idea of where they're going. So in order to contextualize that, maybe we could design a few additional measures or even do some very, very rudimentary forecasting based on 2022's average sales month or monthly sales, and start to design some different scenarios that would help users, really figure out how alarmed they should be about where sales are so far in 2022. So the first design choice that I made here was just to make 2021 grayed out completely. That year is really there for comparison. I felt like it wasn't deserving of color. I just wanted users to be able to reference it. So we've got 2021 called out in gray, and 2022 sales are called out in orange, and I've even marked where sales stand today. And I'm clearly calling out here in my additional descriptive text, 2022 sales are currently lagging 2021 sales, which we can see, with only $1.1 million in sales so far. So what does that mean? Well, one point that I made is that at this rate, we must sustain our current monthly sales rate through the summer dip, which, I immediately kind of go here and say, okay, I see that dip, in order to best last year's sales. So in other words, if we keep selling exactly the way that we are right now, and if we don't run into this dip that we ran into last year, we may be okay. However, I make the point that if we continue to lose steam, in other words, if we continue to sell roughly what we sold in March and February, we're likely to fall considerably short of last year's threshold. So all I did was I literally just created a monthly average sales rate for January, February, and March, and then I created one just for February and March, and then I just created a basic forecast, that multiplied those results by 12 to come up with two, again, very, very rudimentary forecasts to just help a user determine, what are some of the paths ahead of us now, instead of just leaving them to interpret this line chart in a vacuum and try to take next steps on their own. The last thing that I want to leave you with, we'll call this, an 11th tip, but really it's just a word of advice. Treat everything like a template. If you've designed a really cool layout in Power BI, or if you've designed, really cool layout in PowerPoint, make sure that you save everything that you do, because chances are it can be used again later. When I was very early in my Power BI career, every time I started a Power BI report, I felt like I had to design it from scratch. And eventually I wised up to the fact that every time I designed anything, no matter how simple, I save it somewhere where it's easy to find. As a matter of fact, this Power BI report that I'm using for this YouTube demonstration, I totally designed it about a year ago. I did change up the colors a little bit, and I think I'm using some different icons, but a lot of the data visuals that you're seeing in this were already built for another project. Honestly, most of the bookmarks and the themes are things that I was using in a class that I did over a year ago. Everything is a template. Nobody likes to start from scratch. Every time you make a design choice that you think was a good one, save that, use it again later. Trust me, it'll make your life so much easier. So there you go. That was 10 common Power BI design mistakes that I see people, again, most of whom are very new to Power BI, make all the time. But I definitely realized as I was coming up with this list that some of these are mistakes that I still make more often than I would care to admit. So I hope that you found some of those useful. If you are aware that you are making some of these design mistakes today, I hope you felt like you at least are started in the right direction to repairing those mistakes. I know that some of this, there's maybe a little bit more art than science. And style is one of the hardest things for any developer or any designer to actually nail down. But I'm very, very confident that if you can start internalizing some of the pointers that I presented here and start incorporating those into your builds, your users will thank you and you are on the road to designing much stronger Power BI reports. I cannot wait to see you in the next YouTube video. I've got some really exciting stuff coming, including a few tutorials and walkthroughs of some recent projects that I've built that I'm really, really eager to show off. Can't wait to see you in the next YouTube video. Hope you have a great night.